Hi everybody, we're just waiting for a few more attendees to join the webinar. We'll just give it a few more seconds before we begin. In the meantime, if you've got any questions you'd like us to address during the webinar, do put them into the questions area on the right-hand side of your screen. There's a little panel there for you to enter questions, and we'll get to them as soon as we can. I think we'll start. Should we start?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So welcome to the second in our Spotlight on webinar series. This one we're really excited about. It's about online guest experience. I'm Claire Hutchison. I'm a content manager at Triptease, and I'm telling you today about a report that I wrote on this very subject and what I learned while I wrote it. I'm joined by Chris Hastings-Little, who is a designer at Triptease, and he's going to be sharing his wisdom and some of his experience in the field.
Yes, so I'm Chris. I'm a digital product designer here at Triptease. I've been working for various companies for the last 10 years, trying to improve their user experience. I worked at places like Deliveroo and Transport for London.
Okay, great. Before we get properly stuck in, we'll just give you a quick overview of the format. We're going to start with a quick discussion about what we think are the most important elements for hotels when it comes to online guest experience, and then we're going to do a longer question and answer session at the end. Having said that, if any questions come in the medium time, we will answer those as they come in. So, to begin, we're just going to talk a little bit about why we are addressing this issue in particular. At Triptease, we deal with many hotels around the world, and we obviously try and help them increase their direct bookings as much as possible. Often we come across cases where hotels are putting a lot of effort into that, trying to increase those direct bookings, but for some reason things just aren't working. And when you dig a little deeper, it turns out that it's the website and a poor customer experience online that's really holding things back. Now, this is really important at the moment because so often now the website, not the lobby, is the first place that your guests will experience your hotel and your brand. So it's really important that we get that right. Chris, what do you think is most important about online guest experience?
Well, there are a load of really big mega brands who are doing really good work in this whole industry, and but they apply a really broad brush across everything. So it's really hard for them to expose the great things that your hotel can do, and to be able to explain your experience is done on your website, not on one of these larger companies. So you've got a great opportunity to capture someone's imagination and their desire.
Okay, great. We'll just show you here. We've got an example of an amazing lobby. This is Raffles in Singapore. It's been voted one of the best lobbies in the world. And now we want you guys to bring that experience of a lobby like that onto the website. One way we think that you should be able to get the most out of your website is by focusing on an area called user experience design. Now, there's a lot of definitions of user experience design out there, but there's one goal rather behind UX design that people often go to, and it's quoted here: to improve customer satisfaction through utility, ease of use, and pleasure provided with the interaction of products. And now it incorporates a whole load of fields, including visual design, and can mean anything from generating a positive emotion to just making people feel relaxed when they're using a product. So there's a lot to think about. What do you think of what's most important for hotels when it comes to thinking about UX?
Yeah, I guess it's fundamentally quite simple. It's all down to simplicity. If you give someone the information that they really need as soon as possible when they come to your site, then you're making them get through a process decision much quicker than they will elsewhere. So especially it applies heavily on hotel websites, because they come with a research mode in mind, which is one of the hardest ones to deal with, which is they're looking at as many things as possible, taking on lots of information as quick as possible. So if you don't give them what they want straight away, then they'll literally leave.
Okay. So it's really important that we get it right. The thing about design, though, and sort of creating those emotions that we want to connect with guests, is that they're often quite subjective things. I can give you some examples of this. These are some of the websites that people at Triptease have told us that they like using the most. This one here is Citizen M. People talked about liking the fact that the visuals are front and center, but it's also really clear. You can see that red bar at the top where you have to book. There's no complication around that. Next up, we've got One and Only Resorts. Now this is similarly quite a clean design, but it's very image heavy, so it looks very different to Citizen M. You can't even see an image of the hotels or the resorts themselves. And lastly, We've got Nordic Choice, which is maybe a more basic design, but it's so clear. You can know where to book straight away. And again, just in terms of being able to go smooth through the booking process, people thought this was a really good example. So you can see how much things vary from website to website. But there are some basic rules around user experience and design that we think will help you get to where you need to be with your website. The first of those, as you can see here, is content. And what we mean by this is starting out with a really clear idea of what your hotel stands for and the story that you'd like to tell. And to do that, knowing what kind of images, if you need video content, if you need text, and if that's all original, that's really, really unique to your hotel, and building your website around that. It should help you determine what information should be put where, how to structure your site so that information is given prominence, and also the kind of design and the look and feel of the site. So it's a real good starting point for everything about your website.
Yeah, as I was saying earlier, it's very important to kind of work out exactly what your customers want to see. So the content should exactly match what you're expecting them to find on your website. So, but I'd like to quickly raise a point about the text. Quite often with websites, people load it with text thinking that people will read all this, but in all honesty, they're not going to. There was some research done in 2008 which said that actually for longer articles, people only read about 20% of the word. They actually skim down it in kind of in a pattern which is kind of jumping between the words they actually they're looking for. So quite often, if you put more than about 200 words on a page, people are going to probably miss more than half of those words.
Okay, that's really interesting. I mean, often you think that your information is the most important thing, but it's definitely something to really think about how you present it to make sure you get the most out of it. You can see that data that Chris was talking about right there. It's such an important thing to remember, not to overload things with text if you don't have to. Now, next up, we've got quality visuals. Now, this one might sound really obvious. It's really important to have good pictures. But so often we come across fuzzy photographs of things that look old, and it can really undermine the confidence that guests have in your brand if they don't think that your website is up to date. It's not going to give them a great amount of hope in that your hotel's up to date. Now, we've got an example here. This is Apple. They've won awards for pretty much everything about their website, and they rely heavily on striking images. And though, you know, lots of hotels might not have the design clout that Apple has, it's a really great example of how to use quite a simple image, this is just a product image, and make it really special. The one thing to remember about images, though, on web is that they have to be optimized for your website. So if it's a really big file that's not usually intended for the website, it would be worth changing things around to make sure that they load. Otherwise, your guests could be waiting for a while for the images to load, and again, that kind of chips away at the confidence that your guests will have in the sites.
Yeah, and it's super important to think. It's kind of a picture's worth 1,000 words, if that kind of that saying goes. And then also on top of that, kind of a video they say is worth 1,000 pictures. So depending on your budget or your ability to kind of get these photos taken, it's really important to kind of just nail these high quality visuals. There's the thing about visuals is your brain processes them on both the left and right hand side. So you're kind of historically and kind of how we've evolved as humans, we've done hundreds of thousands of years of processing visuals, whereas we've actually only dealt with text for kind of 10,000 years. So we're much better at processing them much quicker. So there's a reason why kind of Pinterest and Instagram has such a huge rising in the last kind of 10 years, is because people just want to process quickly these images as fast as possible. And as we mentioned earlier, the research mode really kicks in, so you're really limited on time to like nail exactly what they want.
So in your opinion, is there a particular type of content that hoteliers should be prioritising over others? Is it a question of minimising the amount of text on websites, or is it finding a balance?
I think you've just got to be rigorous and concise. You've really got to get exactly, you want to pitch to them your perfect elevator pitch, kind of the 30 seconds you have to sell your lobby. So if they are kind of a honeymoon couple, you get lots of honeymoon couples on your website. You want to kind of promote maybe the spa or your honeymoon suite, that sort of thing. Or if you get kind of the older generation, you might want to promote various different things. Or families, you want to promote childcare. So it's important to really get that content up front, depending on who your target market is.
The next one we're going to talk about is one that maybe sounds, again, a bit obvious. It's about getting interaction with your booking engine perfect. Now, the reason why this is so important is, again, to do with confidence and reassurance for your customers. If you have put a lot of effort into your website, having it look and feel a certain way, and then you push them into a booking engine that doesn't match that, then it can just add a little bit of not necessarily frustration, but unease about how smooth the booking process is. And holidays and travel are often big purchases for people, so you want to give people absolute reassurance that the site that they're going to book with works really well, and they're getting what they need out of it. One UX designer told me that the ideal is that your interaction between your booking engine has to be seamless. There has to be no obvious way for a customer to tell that they've been moved onto a booking engine. So it's well worth doing your homework when it comes to booking engine and making sure that the website that you're trying to build and the impression that you're trying to give can be mirrored by the booking engine experience. We'll move on to the next one now. This one is responsiveness, and it's this kind of refers to whether the website reacts in the same way depending on the screen you're using. So often the ideal is talked about is that you're using your website that's exactly the same whether you're using a smartphone, a tablet, or a desktop computer. But I know, Chris, you had some thoughts on whether if a responsive website is absolutely necessary.
This is always brought up with and it has for years. People said, is it actually that important to have a mobile website? But the stats are in, and it says that kind of specifically to hotel bookings, 40% of users are booking via mobiles now, and that rises every year. So next year it might be 45%, 50%. It will keep going up. There's a number of people out there who don't own computers anymore. They only own mobile phones. So the only method of them being able to book hotels is via their mobile phone. So quite simply, if you aren't offering a decent mobile experience, you're just going to be losing bookings left, right, and centre. It's funny because it's literally just such a simple thing, and people always get it wrong. And quite often when people go and they test their website, they never test it on a mobile, and then they come back around and they find they're losing kind of 5–10% of their bookings solely because people aren't able to find the information they want.
Okay, so mobile friendly is an absolute must.
Yeah.
But responsive is something that is an ideal, but might not be something that you have to have right this moment.
Yeah, as long as you have a version of your website which works on mobile, there are good and great ways of doing it, but if you're not doing it at all, that's the big problem.
Okay, right. So next up is usability. We're just going to pause for a second because someone has mentioned that we've got a problem with the sound. Bear with us 1 second while we just try and resolve that. We'll just try that and see if things are improving, so hopefully you can still hear us. Do let us know if there's any more problems with the sound, and we will try and get it sorted. We will move on to the next one in the meantime, and that is usability. Now, basically what we're talking about, this is a really, really broad term, but essentially it means how easy your site is to use. A good way to benchmark how well you're doing on this front is to compare it to something called the 10 heuristics of usability. These were created by a man called Jacob Nielsen, and they include, as you can tell, 10 things. One of them is about consistency and standards. So, for example, do the words and the actions that you want people to make while they're on your site, do they all make sense? Does everything sound the same? And another one, for example, is can you help users recover from an error? So if something happens and things go wrong, does an error message pop up that helps your customers rather, get back to where they need to be and back on track with their booking? You can use a bunch of tools out there for free that will help you work out how well your site is doing at the moment in regards to the 10 heuristics of usability. One, for example, for Google Chrome is called UX Check. So just Google that, and it's a plugin, and you should be able to use it to find out how well your site is working in terms of usability. You had a few thoughts on how to make sure that you can see for sure that your site's polishing on that front.
See, I think it's a very good point, a point in the conversation to bring up testing. Ultimately, the number one thing that you should do on your own website is test it, and that's simply by taking your own opinion out of the equation. It's so easy to get bogged down with what you believe is correct when actually you're not serving what your customers want better. And then it doesn't require loads and loads of money to use a test. There's kind of there's a fallacy which people think that it requires thousands of pounds to get some testing company in, but it's not true. I personally quite like a kind of quick and dirty method of testing, which is I grab a friend or a family member or anyone really, but preferably someone who's never used what I'm building before. So get them in, sit them down next to you, and get them to run through various flows in your website. So, for example, quite obviously the booking flow. You want to test how people get from the home page to the finish the booking button. And it's important to just note down any times that they get stuck or they are confused. And if they talk out loud, you can fully understand what they're trying to go through. But it gets really important when down the nuanced bits where, for example, someone's trying to find out if your hotel has childcare on Sundays, for example. So quite often those sort of questions can come up. So if you set down a bunch of questions that you want people to test, and then you just write down whether they're struggling with them, and if that's coming up more and more often, then you need to fix that.
Okay. So even with a small group, you can make some really good observations. How much should you put in the observations of a small group like that? Should you, once you've found problems, should you then test them again, or do you just take that test at face value?
I usually try to do a test 2 or 3 times. People say the best amount is about 5 times, and then if you're getting it more than once, you know there's a problem. It's fundamental.
Okay. Okay, moving on. We have accessibility. Bear with me 1 second. Now we have accessibility. This is making sure that your website works for every single type of user that could come across it. It's really important because obviously you don't want to close off your site and your service and your hotel to any group of people. Obviously all customers are welcome. There are a few different things that could cause problems for people with disabilities or certain conditions that often people don't realise. For example, fast-moving images could cause problems for people with motion sickness, and also people who are using screen readers, maybe who are visually impaired. Lots of text you can see has phrases like "click here for more information," but if you're using a screen reader, often "click here" doesn't mean very much. So you have to really make sure that your site is working for people who don't necessarily use the internet like everybody else. Again, there are some tools out there that can help you get this right. There's something, if you go to www.wave.webaim.org, you can plug in your website and it will immediately show where some pain spots might be for people who have disabilities or certain conditions. And there's also some guidelines online. They're quite detailed and take some time to go through, but well worth doing it. Those are called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, so best to have a look at those.
It's important at this point to kind of think about it's not necessarily just a small fraction of people who struggle with accessibility. Quite often people say that kind of red-green colorblind. There aren't many people out there, but 5% of men are red-green colorblind. So it's important to check that you're not using just color to highlight things. Also, and more apparent in the hotel industry is the older generations, they lose contrast in their eyes. So kind of black and whites become more kind of grayscale, which means that if you have colors which are too close in contrast, they honestly just can't read it. So there are a number of contrast checkers online which you should definitely try checking out on your website, especially your kind of primary colors and your secondary colors, and just make sure they all work perfectly fine together.
Before we go on, just a reminder to ask any questions. There's the panel on the right-hand side, and there's an area for questions there, so just pop your thoughts or any comments that you'd like us to address in there. Also, I wanted to ask everyone who's tuned in today if they have what their greatest challenges are when it comes to online guest experience, and we'll see if we can address those when we come to the Q&A. So moving on, we have branding. Now, this is, again, all about, we've mentioned it a few times, about giving consumers confidence that they're using a hotel that they can trust and that's going to treat them well. And a big part of it is making sure that your branding is consistent across all the pages of your website, so every page feels connected. And at the very best, you obviously want your hotel to connect emotionally, if possible, with your customers. That will be the start of a long-lasting relationship. So when you've figured out what your brand stands for, really playing up those unique characteristics can really pay off when it comes to things like loyalty, trying to build a long-lasting and relationship and return custom. What do you think? How do you think people should approach branding online?
It's a sad thing that people always judge a book by its cover, but it's just happened every single time. So if your logo, if your site feels clean, minimalistic, it's what they're expecting, then they will instantly fall in love with your place. I think kind of branding's very good at driving return sales. If you have something about your brand, whether it's your logo, the colors, your tone of voice, which is memorable, people next time they're booking for something in the same place might remember that, oh, I had a really good experience at that place, and then come back. So it's very important.
Okay. So independent hotels, if they're thinking about branding, I mean, it's obviously a different equation. If you're a very large group, you've got a clear brand, and you're trying to, if you're a large American group, you want business customers, for example, to stay in your hotel every city they go to. For independent hotels, is branding of the same importance, do you think?
I definitely don't think you have to spend the money that a lot of people do. I think as long as you are portraying the idea of your website, whether it's a boutique hotel or it's an eco hotel, whatever it is, it should portray that. But for me, it's kind of, I'd much rather spend more money on kind of a better user experience in terms of kind of getting it tested well and making sure that it's got a great mobile experience over branding.
Okay. Well, you said testing there, and that is our final slide. It's definitely something that you've heard us talk about a bunch of times, but that's because it's extremely important. Chris, over to you again.
Yeah, it's kind of just reiterating on it. It's every time you make a change to your website, you should just double check that it's working. So many times you find people who are losing sales, and they're like, why am I losing my sales? And actually it's because they've not activated one of the buttons, so it doesn't actually work, and so people just can't book. It should be kind of a real iterative process. Every time you test, you should kind of plan next time you do it, for the next time you want to do it. So in kind of 6 months down the line, you have something in your diary saying, right, test again your website, because everyone thinks that when you deploy a website, it just stays in its current condition, but all the tools that you build into it might break, and you don't know. So it's important to make sure that every 6 months, every 3 months, if you can, whenever you can, you just double check that everything fundamental to your website is working perfectly.
Okay, so setting aside time and budget, I suppose, for these kind of tests is.
It could, and it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be expensive. There's a lot of kind of quick and dirty principles which just allow you to do it with a couple of mates, and it's highly important that you just kind of just sense check it every now and again, even if it costs you nothing. You do it in your spare time.
Great. Now we're just going to move on to something that we featured in the report. Now we did, if you read the report, we did a ranking of the Mighty Eight, as they're known, large hotel groups, and how their websites compared. We asked a bunch of UX experts to have a look at each one and give them a different rating. Now we're not going to go into it in too much detail today because those UX experts, the panel that we used, are not with us, so we can't ask them exactly why they picked what they picked. But I'll just summarise the top three and why they came out on top. In third place was Best Western. And the reason for that was because everything is laid out so clearly. You can see quite easily where to go if you want extra information. There's obvious cues to TripAdvisor reviews. There's a picture gallery, and but it's still quite a clean design. So the experts thought it was quite an intuitive site to use. You could move from picture to information as very easily. Next up, and it was quite a close call between Hyatt and Best Western when the scores came in. And that's Hyatt. And I think the reason this one out in the end was because of its use of images. This one here, it actually when you go on the site, it changes from image to image, but they're all very strong, interesting images. And again, the booking form is front and center, so you're in no doubt as to how to get through the booking process.
It's interesting. It looks like they've used a golf course as one of their initial images, which is clearly they're targeting those type of people, and kind of that sort of leading, kind of trying to find that exact thing people want to see when they enter a website is going to make it work for them.
and the winner was choice. Now, orange might not be everyone's colour, but this was chosen because of the strong branding. And again, it was all about the peace of mind that customers would have when using this site. They thought that constantly seeing the choice branding and everything being linked together would really give people a peace of mind. The other thing that people really liked about this was the very, very clear booking form at the bottom there. You've got every option. You can so simply just put in absolutely everything you need, and then you're ready to go. So it was just, I think simplicity was the key here, but also that really, really strong branding that left people in no doubt that this was this hotel group would take you through the whole journey. Okay, so now we have time for some questions. I'm just going to see if we've got any come through. So this is a question about testing and what kind of testing that people should be using. So Chris mentioned about using people, focus groups, or whether there should be automated testing that, for example, looks at the more technical side of things, the back end of the website, or whether there should be a combination of them all. What do you think?
Ideally, it's a combination. I think back-end testing is really great if you have the know-how to do it. I am a huge advocate of installing kind of Google Analytics into your website so you can understand the users who are coming through it, see if there's any hold-ups, so any points they're getting stuck somewhere. But also, there's nothing like sitting down with someone and then just getting confused. And you can spot it in their eyes when something goes wrong, when they're kind of slightly, and they'll try to cover it up, and you're like, actually, what was going on there? Kind of, and you don't get those nuances from back-end testing as much as you do as sitting with a person. I guess the more advanced you can go with that sort of thing is finding someone who has never used your website before and is your target market, at which point it becomes even more relevant.
Okay. You mentioned Google Analytics there. What can people actually learn from Google Analytics? What kind of thing, what can they interpret from that?
Should we stop a screen share quickly? From Google Analytics, you can learn a whole load of things. Quite often, you find that you're missing out on a target market you never knew you had. So if you find out that people are coming from a certain marketing thing that you've done, or even, let's say, someone's featured you in a blog you've never heard of, you're getting traffic through there, you can start to understand where certain channels are working and who you're marketing to better than others. And you can also kind of work out places that are kind of really holding people up and kind of stopping them from using your site in an effective way.
Okay, and I guess you can see which pages are the most popular, so if there's pages that aren't being used, you can kind of reorder the information and put it elsewhere.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, next question. So, should you try and put all the key information on the home page or have navigation to other specific pages?
So there's originally there used to be this principle that people called the fold, which was kind of 600 pixels is the only part of the top 600 pixels of your website, the home page, is the only part of the website I'll see before clicking away. Now that's actually changed with the kind of rise of mobile. People have started scrolling to the bottom and seeing a bit more. So you're kind of a bit of a middle ground. You don't want to overcomplicate your homepage. If you overcomplicate it, then people just get confused and switch off. So I quite like the way I've always seen it is you try to summarize your top 3 to 5 things on your homepage, and then give clear indication of where they can find the rest of the information elsewhere, and then make the other pages completely consistent in their own target.
Okay. All right. So we have another question. Should we have a different mobile site, not just a responsive version of the desktop?
So responsive version of the desktop is ideal, solely because quite often when you create like an M.dot website, like a mobile website, people when you create it, you actually miss some of the links out, so it's quite hard to navigate it exactly the same way. Whereas if you design properly from kind of a mobile, like a desktop responsive, but you design it from kind of a mobile first sort of method,
right,
you'll make sure that all the content's in it, whether on mobile or desktop or tablet or everything. It's quite there's actually quite a large percentage of people who use tablets, and so when they use a tablet and you've only got a mobile or desktop site, you're actually not catering for them in either way.
Right.
Having said that, having a mobile site and a desktop site, if you can't afford to upgrade to a responsive desktop site, don't worry about it. Like, at least you're serving mobile. But next time you think of overhauling your website in 5-10 years, maybe think about that.
Okay. Great. How do you manage the amount of content on a page versus the content required for search engine optimization? Sounds like a tricky one.
So people used to think, well, the way Google and other search engines used to handle SEO was they'd crawl the website for loads of text. They'd pull it out and they'd use that to manage their SEO. Now, actually, it's much more complicated than that, and there are people whose whole jobs are devoted to SEO. So I wouldn't overthink adding loads of text to your homepage because it will improve SEO. Quite often, SEO is improved by links on other websites or how many times people visit from various places. So I'd focus on making that the website relevant for people entering rather than wordy for SEO.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Cool.
Would you sacrifice speed and responsiveness for the best quality images? We talked about this a little bit earlier about waiting for pages to load. What are your thoughts?
So there are many ways of being able to load in images in a responsible way. You can have multiple sizes of an image and load them in sequence. So you load in the lowest quality one first and then a higher one over the top of it, okay. So that people see an image to begin with, and then if they're on a slow collection, they just won't see the larger one.
Right.
But that's kind of skirting the question a bit. So I think it's a middle ground. I wouldn't say either way. If you've got bad quality images, funnily enough, actually SEO does factor into that. So Google actually trawls and sees if you've got bad quality images. But there's a middle ground. Like, don't go mad. Don't have like a Retina huge image, which is kind of 5 megabytes.
Right.
There's a website which is called tinypng.com, and it can strip back various things within images, which reduces your file size by up to kind of 30–40%. So I'd highly recommend using that, because then you can have a nice high quality image, but actually it just be smaller. It doesn't look any different, which is crazy, but good to know.
Yeah, very good to know. Say the website again, just so
so it's called tinypng.com.
Great. And the thing you mentioned first about sequencing the images, is that something that you'd need a sort of web developer to help you with?
That is, yeah. And it's not something I know a huge amount about, but there are ways of loading in things when they enter the page, and depending on your connection speed. So I'd look into that if you have a web developer. Okay,
so there's ways to work around it. Are multiple language versions of the website important, or is Google Translate and other similar tools good enough for visitors to use for themselves?
It's all down to your users. If you have predominantly Spanish speakers, then have a Spanish website. If it's predominantly English speakers, have an English website. If you're finding 50–50, you probably want both. It's then completely down to you of how much budget you have and the percent. This is where Google Analytics comes in well. Is if you find out that you've got 5% German users, like Germans historically have quite good English, so that's probably not worth spending a lot of money on translating it for it. But it's very important to just use percentages, use your users to determine what you want to provide.
Shameless plug here for anyone who wants to know a little bit more about Google Analytics. We did do a report on it a couple of weeks ago, which you can find on our website. Just go to the blog and click on Hotelier's Guide, and you should be able to find it there. Have you got any further questions? If not, I have one for Chris as well. Oh, okay, we'll move on to this one. How many pictures is too many?
I don't think it should be down to how many pictures. You need to. It comes back to you need to portray the feeling, the emotion that you want to portray in as few bits of content as possible. Ideally, if you have a single image that will just blow people away, then use that. I've seen, and that was interesting because one of the hotels shown at the end of your presentation where they used loads of images synced up. Now, for me, I find that you're actually hiding a lot of content now. Kind of the big header images that scroll across, because they're on a timer, you're actually waiting to see other images. So I'd rather have kind of one great image than 3 on scrolling around.
Okay.
The challenge at that point is then how do you get enough content onto the page to suit all your different target markets. But that's the way. If I were you, I would try multiple things and see what works best.
Okay. So in that case, well, we talked earlier about content being the first thing that you should think about and build your site around. Should you, at that point, before you even start building that content, should you know about your target market? Should you start with a sort of persona of a customer before you even do the content?
I think it's highly likely that you guys have an idea of who likes to come to your hotel. And usually you understand what type of people want to use, will be trying to find stuff on your website. So I guess you might even probably have already done a lot of that work already. So I wouldn't bother going around and doing a bunch of personas, but just be mindful of who they are, and because it's not just the hotel that the actual kind of physical hotel that you need to cater that for, it's just the website as well.
Got another question. How do you feel about unmoderated versus moderated testing?
I always find when you sit in a room next to someone and you can influence them and how they perceive a website. So if I'm sat here and you like me, you're going to say that you like the website more than if I'm sat here and you hate me, and you'll say you don't like it as much solely because you're doing it in spite. The problem is that unmoderated testing is lots harder, and you don't get, as we were saying, the nuances of spotting someone's reaction and ask them about it, because unmoderated, you kind of just got to let them go with it and just pick up on it later, sort of thing.
Okay, so you might miss an opportunity to find out exactly what the trouble was.
Yeah, the method of moderating a user testing session, it is difficult, and you can get harder, so you can get better at it. Just be conscious of trying not to lead people into responding the way you want them to respond. Ask open-ended questions, similar to kind of a psychotherapist would ask. Kind of, so how do you feel about that? Is a really good question, rather than do you like the button?
Okay. Next one. Should designers be concerned with fallback for non-JavaScript browsers still? What do you think?
I don't know the stats on it anymore. I have definitely felt in the last 3 or 4 years that we've stopped caring as much. Back when I worked for Transport for London, we cared about it a lot, solely because there are a lot of companies in London that have limited OS systems on their computers, so their JavaScript is automatically turned off for security reasons. Once again, it's down to budget. Also, if you have good, if you have analytics, I wonder if you might not be able to find that out through analytics because it's JavaScript based. But yeah, I mean, it's up to you. I think it's becoming less of a problem because it's so heavily baked into all browsers now.
Okay, that's good news, I think. One thing I wanted to ask is if you had an example, we've been talking about testing a lot, if you had an example where testing really paid off for you, where you found out something that maybe you weren't expecting to find out.
Interestingly, so when I was working at Deliveroo, we had we were introducing a kind of a question. We had a question. So when a rider picked up a food delivery from a restaurant, they would have to check it in and say that I've now got the food delivery. And back then, I used to cycle around with drivers and find out how their experience was going. And we found out that little check-in was taking them 20 to 30 seconds to check in. And that's because they had to get on the bike, they had to do it and then get on the bike. It was actually better for the restaurant to do that check-in, so say that the food has left the hand of the restaurant rather than the driver saying they collected it, which meant that the driver could get straight on the bike and get straight out, which saved them 20 to 30 seconds every single time. But that meant over the 5,000 drivers that we had in London at any point in time, you're saving thousands of man hours a week just solely because you removed the check-in thing. So that was the point where, like, actually, fundamentally, that's not needed. We can change that and save loads of time. Okay,
great. I'll just see if you've got any more questions. We're just coming close to the end of the session, but one more. What should be at the bottom right corner, the submit or cancel button?
Always put forwards, so like forwards-facing questions on buttons to the right and backwards on the left. So I'd submit on the left and cancel. Sorry, submit on the right and then cancel on the left. That doesn't apply when you're you look at foreign websites where everything's back to front. But bottom right or top right should always be onwards, like submit or book now, or like a proactive sort of messaging.
Okay, we're going to squeeze in one more. What are your thoughts on having live chat on the site?
I personally, I absolutely love live chat. I've chatted to, I used to chat to guys at Intercom, and they see huge uptake on live chat. I think their stat was something like conversions of 3 times better when they live chat. And the modern generation doesn't want to pick up the phone as much as it used to. So the ability to kind of back and forth very quickly and just drop a question is proving very useful to a lot of people.
Right, I mean, you can see it all. You can see it in online retail. You can see it in hotels often a lot of time these days. So it's definitely something that's becoming more and more common. Great. Okay. We also have another webinar coming up next month, so we will send out details of that soon. It's in collaboration with T News, and it's all about live chat. So we will be talking on lots of data and everything else we've found out about live chat so far, some good examples from outside the industry, and a whole load of other things. So make sure you listen in for that one as well. Thanks again for joining us today. There will be a recording of today if you want to pass it on to any of your colleagues who couldn't make it, or if you want to listen again. So look out for that on by email. Thanks very much.
Thank you.